here with Oxford resident Ray Van Tine. You may be familiar with Ray's well drilling business. He's been doing that around these parts for many years. We were talking about some of Ray's early years in the Navy, and Ray was in the Navy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I wanted to talk about that for a couple of moments with him. Ray, tell me about some of your first memories of that period of time and the Cuban Missile Crisis. You were right down there on a ship at that time, is that correct?
That's correct.
What are some of your first memories of when things started to happen?
That we were in deep trouble. That's my first memories.
What kind of things did you hear from your commanders and the higher-ups?
Well, they don't talk to the people aboard ship. They have their orders and they follow, they issue commands, and that's it. The USS Canberra was a flagship for the entire fleet. In other words, the aircraft carriers are not the flagships. The President of the United States talks to the commander or the admiral who is aboard the flagship.
But what did your immediate supervisor tell you about what was going on?
Nothing. They don't tell you nothing.
What did you know?
I knew it was...
You knew it was serious?
Yes. Like I said, we all knew we were going to die.
And you knew the Russians were in Cuba?
Yes. And that was the reason we're there, to stop ships from coming in.
Tell us about the progression of that as things evolved.
It just happened. It happened fast. It just was there. I mean, the order was there, the ships were there, and...
How close to pulling the trigger did you get?
Close enough to think that we were all going to die. I can't say it any other way. That's why I have the license plate that I have, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I went in there and I says, you know, we got, everybody else has all these license plates, and I said, I want something that says the Cuban campaign on it.
Sure.
So they came back with a Cuban Missile Crisis. So I have 2 plates now that has the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Besides afraid, how did you feel about all that?
Just kind of numb. The whole atmosphere aboard the ship was completely different than normal times. There was no more laughter, no more... It was just different.
What do you remember about when it finally came to a conclusion? What was said to you at that time?
Nothing.
I mean, how did you get the message that it was over?
It just, from other ship members who are on the bridge with the captain, and I had a secret clearance when I was in, and then radar, all the communications go through radar, radar, CIC, Combat Information Center, and you hear all the internets, or you got all these different circuits going, so that's how you know.
Did you see other Russian vessels?
We saw them. We cut them off.
So once that subsided, how did your mission change?
We just went our way. And it was not long after that John Kennedy was killed.
Right.
And I was in Norfolk, Virginia. Actually, Norfolk, what is it called? The beach. Anyway,
Virginia Beach.
Virginia Beach. That's. I was living there with my lady, my wife at the time, and that's where the news, and that's when almost everybody that was home, almost everybody was waiting for the word to get back to your ship, because nobody knew whether it was Soviet or what. So that was a very, very trying time.
Once that was over with, was your feeling one of, man, I can't wait to get out of this? Or what? How were you feeling about your future?
I wanted to get out of the Navy.
Back to a normal life.
Back to not the farm, but yeah, I just wanted to get out. I was really starting to hate the Navy at that time.
So as the clock was ticking down your tour of duty, and you were getting closer to the time of getting out, what were you thinking of doing with your life?
I wasn't thinking anything, but when I got out, the day after I got out, I went to General Motors, and they wanted me to go to work right then and there.
What type of job did you get?
I got probably one of the best jobs in the whole plant. I worked in a parts department.
Was that here in Michigan?
Yes, in Pontiac.
Oh,
That's when it was Pontiac Motors.
okay. So you and your wife moved back to Michigan then?
Yes.
Okay. How did you like working for General Motors back then?
What?
How did you like working for General Motors back then?
It was boring.
I mean, you had this electronics experience.
I wasn't using any of it.
You had kind of a challenging job there in the Navy.
I was at Pontiac Motors for 2 years, and being I was so brilliant, I decided that seniority was a sickness. It would stop you from doing anything else you wanted to do in your life. So I quit. And I went to work for the telephone company.
What was tempting to you about the telephone company?
My brother was working for him.
What were you doing for the telephone company?
I run Almont, Dryden, and Metamora. I run all trouble with no training.
Well, maybe no training in the telephone company.
Except from the Navy.
Did that help?
Oh, yeah. Yes, very much so. With the telephone company, I lived in Dryden. They said we were going to have to transfer you to Brown City. And Brown City is the most nothing place on earth. And I says, no, I'm not going to Brown City. And they said, well, you have to go. I says, no, I don't. And I didn't go. I quit. And I went to work at Koenig's Gravel Pit on Lakeville Road.
Well, that was a different sort of job.
Yeah, well, I didn't know what I wanted to do in my life.
Let's just, while we're talking about this, I have to ask you, did your dad still have the farm back then, at that time?
No, my father passed away in 1976.
I see. And you started working in the gravel pit at what year? In what year?
Oh, that was 1967 or 68.
So your dad was still around then?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
Yes, he was.
All right. We're going to take a break here, but we'll be back in just a moment. Don't go away. Here with Ray Van Tine, we were talking about you decided you didn't want to work for the phone company anymore because they wanted to transfer you to someplace you didn't want to go. So you started working at the gravel pit. Now this was the late 60s, right?
Yes.
Okay, had your dad given up the farm by then?
No, I guess he hadn't. No, he did not. He finally sold the farm, but I don't know when he sold it. He moved back up to Brown City to my grandfather and grandmother's place, and that's where he lived.
Okay, so what did
I
you...
don't remember. I don't remember.
Tell me about your new job. What did you end up doing?
Well, I worked on the hopper for a while. The train would come up and dump the gravel, and the trucks would come up and dump the gravel, and my job was to get the large stones and roll them into the crusher so they would go through the plant. It was quite remarkable. And then I got a truck driving job there, and then I had a go around with the superintendent. He come around and he hit me and spun me around. So I was pretty tough back then, coming off the farm, and I just tapped him. Well, he kind of went around a little bit too, but I never beat him up or anything like that. Just one little tap. So I decided that was not good. I had an opportunity to work for an asphalt company. It was called Lind Asphalt, L-I-N-D. And I got a job driving truck, and I hauled heavy equipment all over the state, or wherever we were working. I'd get up sometimes 300 miles in the city of Detroit in one day.
Now, were you still married at the time to the
Yes,
lady that...
yes.
Yeah, okay.
And I got to like that job quite a bit. And I'd work anywhere from 12 to 20 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for about 7 years.
I'm sure that the jobs that you held were more than sufficient to get you by on. But in view of the kinds of things you were working on in the Navy, did you find any of that a little boring?
No.
Did
I
you
didn't
have a
realize-
yearning to get back into electronics a little
I
more?
didn't realize how important it was to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like you say, I grew up on the farm. I never saw an outside world. I didn't know there was an outside world. We never got to play with the kids or anything like that, the neighbors. So, but I just, finally, the asphalt company went out of business, and I bought one of the trucks, and I started my own company.
Well, you got to tell me, before we get into that, I have to ask you this. You've seen a lot of the world because of
Yes.
your experience in the Navy. Did that change the way you looked at things when you got back here and went through all these jobs?
Oh yeah, yeah. It'd have to. It'd have to make me look at things different. I realized I was lucky I didn't have to be on the farm.
Did you have any children?
Yes,
Was it right around this time that we're talking about?
one was born in 64, and one was born in 66.
Okay, so it was actually before the time that we're talking about now.
Yes, no, yes.
Okay. Tell us about making your mind up to get into business for yourself.
Well, I knew working for somebody else was not always the answer. There was no way to get ahead if you're working for somebody else, like General Motors. I mean, you're locked in with seniority and you can't give it up.
You
So-
you sound like the type of guy who's creative, who have some ideas of your own about how to do things. The type of guy who almost has to be your own boss.
That is true. Absolutely.
So tell me about the struggles of the asphalt business.
Well, I was never home. That was not good, but I mean, I love driving. I love learning. I love the asphalt company. They treated me good.
Roughly what year would that have been when you started business on your own?
That had to have been in 1970, somewhere around 75, 76.
So your kids were 10 or 12 years old or something like that. Yeah. Was that tough being gone a lot?
The what?
Being gone a lot? You said you
Yes,
weren't home very
I
much.
was gone all the time, but I wanted to give my family everything.
Sure. How long did you do that?
Approximately 7 years.
7 years.
Between six and 7 years, yeah.
And what happened to change things?
Well, my house burnt down on Christmas Day.
Tell me about that.
Well, I had gone up to Marlette. I was separated from my wife. And I had gone up to Marlette and I got a phone call. And I had 2 little dogs that died in that fire. And I have a picture of them hanging on my wall up at the house. And to this day, I feel like I killed them. I mean, I stood out there and I just cried and cried and cried. And
But your family made it out of there okay.
yeah,
What caused the fire, do you know?
electrical in the crawl space. I
Yeah,
thought,
okay.
yeah, it was electrical in the crawl space. 2 different investigators. I hired one, and the insurance company hired one. I guess I don't talk about my kids.
Okay.
It's a very, very bad subject. I don't ever see them.
What direction did your life go in after the fire?
Well, I had no place to live, and I was in the real estate business also. I had my broker's license since 1973.
What tempted you to do that?
In the real estate, somebody talked me into it. Another lady.
So you took the
A friend,
course and
only a
passed the
friend.
test.
Yeah, only a friend. And so I like the real estate business, and I've done that. When I was in there in 1979, I bought the Chuck Wagon restaurant that was now Lenny Miller's.
So you were in the restaurant business too?
Yes, I was for a year.
Okay.
We formed a corporation, and there were 6 of us in it, and it was a vote of 4 to 2 to close it. I and another person, we ran it. We were the 2.
It's a lot of work.
So,
Yeah. We need to take a break right now, so let's pause for just a minute. We'll be right back. Back with Ray Van Tine, talking about you discovered another thing you didn't want to do, own a restaurant.
oh yeah. No, that's not.
So what was your next step? You had your realtor's license.
Well, meanwhile, in that time period, I bought 358 acres and 4 houses with $6,000 of money I borrowed from somebody else.
Tell me how that came about.
Through the real estate company. It was a foreclosure.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out absolutely super. I built...
But the $6,000, who did that come from?
I don't remember.
Was it a person or a bank or a...
No, it was a person.
Uh-huh.
But while I was in the real estate, this man came into the office, and you could tell he was someone. And he wanted to buy a place. And so we talked and we talked. I said, "Sir, I don't think you want to buy a place. I think you ought to rent a place for at least a year to discover this area. Metamora is a very prestigious place, and I think you need to figure out where you want to go." And I says, "I have a little schoolhouse around the corner from my place. The Backus family owned it, and that was out on Lake George and Huff. And he ended up renting that. So I never heard another word from him. So when this 358 acres came in, we went to the Emily City Bank, and we talked. I took on a partner at that point. Nothing financial had happened at that point, but anyway, I went up there. I was talking to Gene Coscarelli, who was the president of the bank, and we were talking, and the bank had closed, and we were still in there talking, and we were getting ready to walk out, and this man walked out of the back of the bank.
The guy who was renting your house?
The guy that was renting the neighbor's house.
Neighbor's house.
Yeah. And he says, "Well, hello, Ray." I looked at him. I said, "Hello, Mr." What the heck was his name? Anyway, I said, "Hello." He says, "What we got going here?" And so I started telling him. And I don't know why I told him. Maybe just because he was in the bank. But I told him everything. He turned around. "Is that right, Gene?" And he said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I think that's a good idea. Don't you, Gene?" And he started him-hawing around. "Well, we're going to take it." He says, "Gene, I think it's a really good idea. Don't you, Gene?" Turned around. He happened to be the one that bought the whole bank. He bought the bank, and he remembered me. My act of kindness got me 358 acres.
Wow. So we've got a lot of ground to cover in a short period of time to do that. What became of that land? What did you build there?
I broke it up. I built roads in there, and I cut all the trees out by myself, all by myself. And I worked very hard. We ended up making a lot of money with it.
Did you build homes on it, or?
No.
No.
Only one parcel.
One parcel. Okay. Very good. You got into the well drilling business in what year?
That was probably in 81.
What?
After the divorce.
How did that happen?
The neighbor was working across the road. They had well problems, so the well man was there. In the real estate business, there was nothing. You couldn't buy a customer, so I went and worked for nothing. And I turned around. I liked the guy. I ended up going to his place and helping him do work just to have something to do. And I just absolutely loved it. And while we were doing tours in the real estate business, that was, I was working with Red Carpet Kime, Louise Hergott at that time. And I saw this old well machine on the corner of Lake George and Drainer Road. I ended up going back out there. I ended up buying the rig for $500. And the first job I did, I got $1,650. And that's how I got into the well drilling business.
And you've been in it ever since.
I've been in it. I was in it 6 years, and another well driller turned me into the state or the county for not having a license, but I was supposed to have been under the license of this other guy. So the head man of the state of Michigan, I'm just so proud to say this, he helped me get my license. The head man. Mike Gaber, it was his name.
In the course of trying to do some research for our interview, I learned that there actually was a Van Tine who has a patent on a well drilling machine. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Maybe it's one of your ancestors. You ought to check
Well,
it out.
that'd be
Maybe
awesome.
it's in the family. At what point did you get your pilot's license?
That was after the house burned down and my divorce was final and everybody deserted me. I said, you know, all I've done in all my life was work, so it's Christmas time for Ray. And that's what I did. I got my pilot's license in 1986. I finished it in Almont, Michigan.
So did you do a lot of flying right away?
No, actually, no.
How long did it take you to get your first airplane?
Oh, probably, I can't remember that. That was a little 150.
But you've owned more than one airplane, haven't you?
Yes, I have a Cessna 172 right now, and I bought a Cessna 180 Powerhouse, and I just sold that December 30th.
Uh-huh.
And I still have the 172, and I just got my certification for another 2 years.
So do you do a fair amount of flying these days?
No. The airport's too far away. I used to fly, I'd go up on the hill behind here. I'd go right down the hill and down the road, and I'd take off. But I had some neighbors that have horses. I'm a little bitter here. Dune buggies, dirt bikes. They can have all that, but I can't fly an airplane. Again, it's the rights of the people. We make ordinances and to stop people from doing things, and that was one of them.
Well, the well drilling business is going pretty well for you, huh?
Yes, I sold my equipment that you see out here. That belongs to Dave Cameron. His John Cameron and son, John, has passed away here about 4 or 5 years ago now.
Are you thinking of retiring?
No, I'll never retire. I love my job and I love to work. I love doing things that other people can't do.
I always like to ask my guests, if you look at your life and if you had a chance to do anything over again, what would you change?
I would have got into well drilling a lot sooner.
Yeah.
When you can hardly wait to get out of bed in the morning to go to work, that's the job you should have.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is, there's no one out there that wants to work hard to get a fantastic job. They want to get paid first. And there's nobody's taking the exam. We're getting fewer and fewer. If we would have kept up to the plumbers and electricians, a well should cost around $25,000 to $30,000 today.
Yeah.
So
I don't think it would be fair to conclude this interview without mentioning that Ray has given a lot back to civilization and to the world. You've worked on 3 wells in Guatemala and 1 well in Ecuador, given your own time free of charge to help the less privileged have a water supply in those countries, and we thank you for that.
thank you very much for
You
saying
betcha.
that. I appreciate that.
Ray Van Tine, thanks for joining us.